Well, look, I mean, it's a really interesting year, but I think I've heard some interesting journalists. My uh, actually professor of mine, but also interesting Forbes professor, Charlie Fink, who's a great follow in terms of his weekly podcast and his Forbes write ups. He really impressed upon me just how big a year this is going to be for the clean model and just what that means to the industry at large as far as cinematic AI. And I know that he has spent a lot of time with the folks at Asteria, and they have a very noisy launch of their Moon Valley Murray model. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, which has a pretty bananas team that we can look into. But they have definitely, from the get, just been a very straight look you in the eyes, like this is the ethical model. Or Paul Trillo, who's someone we respect a lot, and Don Allen Stevenson are both now working at Asteria. I think they've also been very public in their advocacy for the idea and what they're a part of. That they're from what I can tell, a very well financed effort to create something that is a counter to what a lot of people worry about with the notion of these data scraped video gen models. And Adobe is clearly the probably one of the earlier ones that we've seen speaking this language. There might be more. I mean, I think Shutterstock and Getty, as far as image companies, also have a very straightforward license position. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic because, on the other hand, the bulk of the noise that we interact with in terms of what artists are up to is not, spending a lot of time on clean models. I think when Adobe came out, some people had trouble with it being as state of the art, as we like to say, as these other models. So I don't know. I think I'm really curious what we're all going to be thinking about this, if this really does become a year that these become competitive narratives, competitive options, as we are all also seeking distribution and working with partners that might also be reading the same headlines and having the same thoughts about what should we do or what is possible. But I don't know. I mean, that it interests me, and I think Moon Valley launching, I think, is a big moment for this narrative, and now we're going to see what the model itself is like. But what do you think? How do you process this clean versus not clean model?
It's good. I probably haven't put enough thought into it as much as you have, but I do wonder, like, clearly the studios and the agencies or the brands, etc., and the unions maybe even are probably more happy with clean models because they're not violating copyrights necessarily, and they're like, there's all these ethical issues, and they are like kind of assuaging those worries. So on one side, you're going to see, maybe what you're going to see is the larger studios and the unions are going to approve content that uses clean models to go out there, and we're going to see them more and more. At the same time, in theory, the better quality models are going to be the ones trained on all the data, right? Or most of the data. And the Googles and whatever, who might not necessarily be clean, and OpenAI or Runway or whoever. So I wonder if that is going to create a bifurcation in the market where, like, smaller outfits or AI studios or AI agencies or whatever are going to be doing high quality, crazy AI content, while at the same time you have these like clean models who are not doing that. But at the same time, like, I look at what Paul Trillo did. I mean, he's working with Asteria, so which is the connection to Moon Valley, and so like here he is working with the real artist using machine learning anyway to create AI content using real art. So I wonder, like, that is in theory a clean. I mean, if anything, that Paul's video with was it Luco, right? Is like a preemptive.
Kuko.
Oh, Kuko, right? Kuko, you're right. It's like it's a preemptive kind of strike before Asteria and Moon Valley release. Like, it's kind of like showcasing, hey, look at how good of quality you can do with clean, and then here we are with the clean model. So
also animation, versus a lot of the real, more photorealistic stuff. So I don't know if it's more forgiving. I think it just does something different. So I don't know. I think we're all gonna get a look at it soon. I mean, I saw their reel today, and it looks beautiful, like any marketing reel usually does. I think the Adobe Firefly reel was pretty impressive too, but I think some people had trouble with it. So I genuinely don't know, and so I obviously I want everybody to be a part of growing a new ecosystem, but like I think to myself just how much energy is thrown towards even the models that arguably have the most question marks surrounding them, given the geopolitics that's implied by being made in China, and just how much most of the leading creators, at least the ones we follow, just talk about like that Kling is the best, or a lot of people like Hailuo, and or Hunyuan, and like there's clearly just an adherence to what is the best expression of somebody's creativity, like in terms of what they'll take whatever it takes to do what they want to do. So I think there's a crowd of creators that remains to be convinced whether the ethics or the cleanness, I don't know if it matters to them, but whether it's a choice they're going to make. Maybe it does matter to them, but at the end of the day, they're going to do something that makes the best thing that they want to make. Presumably, Paul Trillo earnestly represents a crowd of people that, given the choice, they want to work really hard to choose things that align with their values. I think all of that is a really interesting moment to see how creators behave, whether they feel beholden to the implied creators behind them, hiding inside these data, these data scrapings. I genuinely mostly am curious what the consumer is going to do with all these choices at some point. And if they are in a marketplace where all of these things are available to them, like, I don't know, will there be a police that says only ethical models? Or is that implied as a choice that people should think about? I'm joking. There's no police, but I just mean, will there be something that almost resembles something that affects the choices the viewer makes, which could be the choices the distributors make? Our sort of our friend Chad Nelson and what he's doing with the Critters film that started off as an OpenAI short, and now he's got I think it's the writers from Paddington 3, and it's this really buzzy article that was in Variety. I'm fairly certain that's being, or at least maybe you're going to correct me out. Is that going to continue to be done with Sora? Or is it that it started in Sora and now they're going to traditionally animate it? I need to read that article again.
That I'm not
Do you know
sure.
which?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So let's,
it
so
does
I'm
make
just saying, for example, it makes you think about Whole Foods?
Yeah.
Oh, please. Bring us into the supermarket.
Yeah, because we have a situation right now where the studios are organic, so to speak, and the AI is the new incomer that's not organic. But it's an inverted Whole Foods situation, because Whole Foods arises with Safeway and all these other existing players are not organic, and Whole Foods is the bearer of organic and kind of rises and is the one that gets to say, hey, we have organic food. Because every time I think about this particular problem, I think about the organic label. Like how would you have a film, because this is the Justine Batemans of the world are saying, hey, we have an AI film festival, or film festival that has no AI, right? And so like, is there going to be films that you had Conan O'Brien at the Oscars literally saying, hey, we had used no AI to make this, even though there was a joke. And you have James Cameron who's actually saying it seriously, that hey, there was no AI in the making of Avatar 3 or whatever it was, right? And so like, there is this kind of like, it's like a boast now that we didn't use AI, right? And so it's the inverted.
I guess, like, to me. I don't know. I think that you're probably right, and I love the supermarket reference. I mean, just to kind of respond to this idea of the labeling and like, this was not made with AI. I mean, I think just hearing sort of the noise coming from other stakeholders and all this, and I'm hearing, broadcasters also thinking about what does it take to air something. I mean, I think some of it maybe is legitimately people feeling some sense of, duty. I do think there's a relative hysteria that surrounds the topic that's possibly even warranted when we really think about what Ezra Klein has to say about AI in general and what the broader topic means to a lot of people. But I think we're in a phase that I think we've actually even seen some precursors, like when Anthony Bourdain's documentary first uses generative audio to use his voice, pulled from a generation, but from something he never said. there was a whole bunch of reaction to that. And then many years later, we're starting to see it a little bit more in best practices. There's more transparent methods. People it kind of comes and goes. It doesn't become like the only thing that you hear people talking about. So I think there's an effect to how are people reacting to it. That I wonder if that subsides. But I think all of this is part of this perception of a nutrition label that media wants to have, that somebody feels like it matters to them what's inside. And I think that's probably healthy. I think there's probably a net good thing that, where some people worry about misinformation, disinformation. If that's an across the board concern that we all start caring a little bit more about how and what things are made, like those are probably net good things. But I think as it pertains to this sort of feeling of like, I need to boast that my film wasn't made with AI, or I'm like, I don't know, I can't tell which thing it's addressing when people do it, but I think it's all kind of aggregately like a thing that people feel like they need to do.
Because I think it's because of the climate. It's funny because AI is just in Hollywood is unlike any other, at least, I mean, to the extent to which I understand Hollywood, right? But like, it's unlike any other conversation that has happened when technology arrived at Hollywood shores, like from YouTube to red cameras to like 35 millimeter digital cameras to YouTube and Netflix and streaming. It feels like all of those were like business type threats or technological type threats that did not have the simultaneous like ideological, existential, humanity, doom. Like AI invites all of that too. It invites an existential philosophical conversation that, hey, like not only is it taking our jobs, but it could kill us all. Not only is it making it cheaper, but it's also like going to and it's also connected to Elon Musk. Like it's like it's pulling in all these threads at the same time that are like very very like
emotional.
divisive and
it's
emotional.
emotional.
Yeah, emotional, divisive, and very intense, right?
I guess I think like, I mean, maybe just coming back to like these new models and like, the business that they're entering and the narrative that, which again, let's all remind ourselves, this is all relatively niche still. And most TV isn't made with AI and most movies aren't. So like to people inside the space, it all sounds like a big deal, because I think we're also aware that the impact and the potential is a big deal. So it goes both ways. But, I think like, I almost want to engage two perspectives. There's like, there might be a cynical perspective, and then there's maybe like an earnest one. I think like the earnest one to me is almost more interestingly represented by the advocacy groups that are forming. Is like when I see people that have no skin in the game, but are doing this because they think it's the right thing to do, or because they're actually trying to like talk to policymakers, or they're trying to actually talk to, industry leaders to sort of like make, change that affects everybody. That interests me. And I have a bit more kind of clarity on their motives and what they're up to. We in the doc space, there's a great group called the Archive Producers Alliance that's sort of, very much coming from the community of people that interact with historical records and find ways to tell stories about them. Like to them, it's a big existential threat if everybody just finds it a lot easier to tell Sora, like, give me an old Gold Rush era image that looks great and looks like it even references those very same pictures. That's an interesting friction of people that worry about ethics and people that worry about labeling, and they worry because to me, I think their motives are very interesting. I can't help but notice the amounts of money that are floating around these other ethical conversations. And I'm not questioning their motives, but I'm just saying at some point there's a business position too. And at some point, it certainly would benefit them greatly if this huge opening that all these models have created, by virtue of policy or by virtue of some cultural trend, just completely landed in their lap of like, then everybody has to use their model. Like, I suspect that's actually a really good thing for their business. And to me, that might be a different motive. I don't know if that's their main motive. I believe them when they actually say they care about the issue, and maybe they think this is, a really practical way of addressing it. But I can't help but notice there's sort of an earnest read on these things, and then there's at some point these things are about money too, and you're carving out a really good position, like you're the clean model, and like that if that ends up becoming a consequence of lawsuits that are playing out, or or a consequence of a real consumer backlash, then you're in a good position, and that's a good business move. That's not just a moral move. So there's more going on there, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and this is where things when we start talking about the money, and you got what Moon Valley raised like 75 mil, and you have everybody in the space has multi-millions, right, including OpenAI and including Runway and all them, hundreds of millions. Like, how sustainable is this? How, like, as far as I know, most of the AI creators that I know are making money with client work. That's the bulk of the money that's being made. And they're not making money by making shows because it's so uncertain, because there is no Walmart for Walmart or Whole Foods for AI content yet, right? Or there's no Netflix for AI content. So
I think so
that's
far we
not
have
big.
bodegas. I think we have bodegas.
Yeah, they're little bodegas. That's right. It's coming. I mean, there is a few competitors out there like Escape and Dreamflare and a few others, but it's so nascent that the bulk of money is not being made there by AI creators. And so, like, where does all that money go? Do all these companies, these video models who have multi-millions, end up consolidating? Do they, like, at some point, does Runway, who is not as clean of a model, acquire Moon Valley because they are the cleaner model? And then does that cause an issue, right? Like, what like, what if there's a clean model, not saying it's Moon Valley, but what if there's a clean model out there, and there's many, that is struggling to make money because they are entering now, 2 or 3 years into this journey, a journey where 11 Labs makes $100 million a year, right? And so they have built that, they have that income, and they have a sustainable model. So, I think Midjourney probably also makes $200 million, $250 million a year, right? They are just there. But they decide to acquire a clean model because this clean model is not doing so well. It's like an image generator that's clean. Now, how do the artists that have been acquired by the clean model feel when that happens? How does that complicate things? I think those questions might be coming.
I mean, to me, again, I just keep coming back to the consumer, and like at some point they drive where their eyeballs go. They drive where advertisers want to plant commercials next to, and they sort of have the loudest moral reaction, to sort of contribute to whether a product wants to be made a certain way. Like if the whole world was really as scared of China as our geopolitics would imply, which they may or may not should be. I mean, that's a political question. Why do we all enjoy so many products from China? Most people haven't had that feeling affect their purchasing behavior. Certainly not their MacBook Pros, and a lot of their amazing Apple hardware. So I'm just saying, like, I don't know if we vote with our wallets on as much. I think we might vote with our wallets in a very sort of kind of almost ruthless way when it comes to ethics. I think people might because it's a very not as public a moment of what you did with your money. So I don't know. So if that's possibly a given, then it'll be really interesting how much the narrative that I think people are doing a really good job airing out in public and getting people to get educated and perhaps care about ethics. And maybe that changes the way they vote with their wallets. I think that would be really interesting if this underlying concern really connected with the people that perhaps are neighbors of artists at places like Los Angeles, and they think about it that way. Maybe. I also wonder what happens when these lawsuits are over. At some point, they're going to be over, and I don't want to be cynical about how they will weigh out because I have no idea. I do think there seems to be a wind in the air that Donald Trump's administration is blowing that might benefit the people that stood right behind him, at the inauguration. And they will end, whether they're pro or anti anything, they'll probably end with some kind of settlement. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, there's people that are much better legal observers than me. So this is where I genuinely am useless. But I'm just guessing that they might end with settlements with like precedents of here's what licensing looks like, or here's the money that's owed backwards. Here's what moving forward we're going to do. Something, I mean, I can't imagine they're just going to crush an entire wave of products. Maybe they do. I don't know. I've never seen that happen. But if there's an ending to that, well, then there's a usable product from those dirty models that people will then move forward on. And then what happens?
Right. Well, what is that social media legislation um, that that protects social media companies? Do you know what I'm talking
Oh, it's like a
about?
130 or something.
Section 230.
230. It's either
Yeah,
130 or
the
230. But it means
Communications
that they're not
Decency Act.
publishers. That they're not publishers.
Yeah, it states that no provider of user or user of interactive computer service shall be treated as a publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. And that piece of legislation has protected social media companies and users from a lot of lawsuits and has allowed for a lot of the internet to be born. And so I wonder if a version of Section 230 comes out of this moment, right?
Well, I
Because
mean, does fair
because
use
at some
become
point,
interpreted that way? Yeah.
yeah, because at some point there's going to be this question of, hey, like we're getting too much benefit from AI. We're competing with globally with a lot of competitors, and so we are going to want to protect these AI companies to some extent, despite the fact that there's these ethical concerns. I wonder if that arrives. That could very much well arrive. At the same time, I do feel like the ethics conversation is very unique because the gatekeepers are kind of beholden to the ethical concerns, right? The unions will, light a fire under their butts if the studios start doing AI stuff. I mean, as much as the studios are probably experimenting and very open secret that they are experimenting with AI, the union still will not be happy with that, and so they will hold that hostage for a minute.
Maybe. I
You know?
again, those are all the right people that should argue with each other to find agreements
Yeah.
and hold things accountable. I think I wonder what a labor attorney would say about the state of the leverage of these unions. Like they're also struggling to
Fair.
keep their membership busy. So I
Yeah.
don't know what I think. We saw how that leverage played out and the
Yeah.
strikes. I think they got, some people saying they got a lot out of that. They also, a lot of people stopped working for 6 months, and I don't know if
Right.
the percentages of what they've gained make up for the money they lost. So super messy
And,
stuff. And I certainly net out just want as many people as possible to be working and as many people as possible to be a part of any kind of ecosystem. I just think this there's an interesting existential kind of cliff we're approaching with the launch of models like the Murray Moon Valley, and maybe I'm guessing the updates for Adobe Firefly that are inevitably coming, because I think somebody was reminding me they're just going to keep buying more licensed data.
right.
They'll just do that, and so they can
Totally.
catch up and they can get better. So, and maybe that's how it plays, and we all and then the patient side of the marketplace that isn't rushing to this stuff shows up when it's ready for them and it's all above board. I mean, that sounds great. I can see a lot of people thinking that's a good sequence of events.
I mean,
I feel like one person I talked to that reminded me of, frankly, what is still going on with VFX and just how bad it's been for VFX.
oh yeah, I mean, VFX
Was
has
like
been
how
brutalized.
one of the real, knives in the back of that. Sorry, that's probably a dramatic metaphor. One of the real setbacks. Let's put it that way. I didn't mean to frame it as like a backstab. I just mean something that hurt their position. Was
Yeah.
how at some point a lot of those unique capabilities that were priced at the price points of places like America and the UK got offshored to often government subsidized
Right.
operations in other countries where labor costs a lot less.
Right.
So if we start thinking to ourselves about these models coming out of China that possibly operate very differently, and in the end they might cost very different than these,
Yeah.
clean, better run models. I think the pattern is held before that people end up going to where the price point is better.
Oh, definitely. What one thing that I've thought about a lot lately, and this is not in the video model image space, is that these, you got deep research as this trend line in ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok. They all have these like deep search tools. Manus also, this Chinese competitor. And so like what they're trying to posit is that, hey, they have a PhD level researcher that can help you. Now, the problem to me with that, one of my best friends is a academic. The problem is that they don't actually have access to all the journals necessarily, right? Even though they might have access to the abstracts and the conclusions, most of the best journals are essentially firewalled. And I did the calculation. All the scientific journals in toto would cost, like, there's like 4 or 5 major companies. Each one costs like $50 billion. So they're like IPO, they're on the market. So like, if you wanted to license all that data by acquiring all these companies, you'd need $250 billion, or you'd have to, spend a lot to acquire, which universities do. They spend millions of dollars to license this content so people can access it to build their research. So like, so if that's true in the academic journal world, or a version of that is true, then what is that like in the Hollywood universe, where everything is siloed? WB has their catalog, Netflix has their catalog, Fox, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody is going to acquire all of that content by legal means, right?
I mean, I think that's sort of of all the sort of unspoken secrets. It seems to be pretty obvious that somebody has acquired all that content. They just did it, in all the unethical ways. And I think that's sort of this cat out of the bag. But then a wave of creators are interacting with these models and making new things that the outputs don't look like the inputs.
Right.
It's really interesting. I think it's I don't know if Hollywood at this scale, and when I say Hollywood, I just mean the global media and film TV industry, has ever had this type of existential reality posed to it. I think so many other industries have, and to the extent that I don't think we even hear about them, it's often couched in like March of Progress or sort of evolving technology that things change. But Hollywood has almost gotten a chance to hold its moats and its castle walls, to protect a lot of guilds and a lot of memberships and a lot of people that sort of belong inside of a stable environment to run an industry. These questions are central to what happens next, and I don't know. I really don't know. I think we're about to just watch, what do consumers do, what do new wave creators do, what do advertisers do. It's interesting to see like YouTube do a deal with CAA over like image and likeness policies,
Right.
to like sort of push back on a lot of celebrities represented by CAA that are at odds with how YouTube became a place where fake images of theirs proliferated. So that was an interesting moment of advocacy and policy driven by industry. It'll be interesting if the distributors, retain that moral high ground, and do they similarly line up around things like Mirai and Adobe Firefly and say this is, I think that might be different because that's very literally Taylor Swift and somebody is doing something awful with her image, versus this is content that looks original, and it may have even gone through, there's an increasing wave of tools that kind of prove copyright ability, that something is original or something. But somewhere in its process, there's genetic DNA that belonged to somebody else. I feel like that's a different perception to a casual observer. I think it's much easier to say image and likeness is a real problem, because it actually points to the really ugly stuff that's happening to not famous people that are getting deep faked, and like all the ugly kind of deep fake porn stuff. So I don't know. It's interesting. I feel like it's this sort of like tip of a spear that affects a lot of people's feelings about this technology, and in this case, in whole industries' possible livelihood.
Well, on that note, I wonder, what, I'm very sensitive nowadays to like AI writing. Like I can tell, there's a very like formalistic way about it for now, right? And I can mostly tell when someone is writing from an authentic voice, or a flawed authentic voice, especially very present in text, but like I can see it in social media as well. And I wonder to what extent that is going to be true in film, in video, in television.
But there's like a noticeable quality that the consumer does interact with.
And then how do we redefine, and we've talked about this before, like how do we redefine what is authenticity and like kind of like rawness or genuineness, or even all these words have very different meanings, but like how do we redefine what all of those things mean? Like there's plenty of AI films out there that are really well done, story well told, etc. But I don't really feel anything. I just think, wow, that was really
It
well
was
done.
pretty. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty. It was like, wow, like, the way that they made that guy run is just very real and etc. But I didn't feel anything. But then I see like kind of a shittier AI film in terms of quality, but I do feel something because there was some real work, quote unquote, that was done um, in communicating this like emotional, this genuine, this rawness or whatever. And so it's a little bit different. Um, you
I mean, look,
know,
there's so many genres here. Like I often, a long time ago, I might find myself in discussions with people about reality TV, and like, well, reality TV is everything from cop shows to American Idol and everything between. You're almost like protecting individual shows and why they work or why
right.
they fail. There's a lot of things we're talking about. Like I think a movie like Flow, which wasn't made with AI, but a lot of AI people got excited about because it was, outsider artists relative to the Hollywood ecosystem, and winning an Oscar. That movie succeeds in its context of a cheaper technology that expressed interesting ways because it's a cute cat and like this wondrous journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very different. I don't even know if it's a threshold. It's a very different category than staring into like a real person's eyes who's an incredible actor and just has a gift at making you feel something with this ability they have with their face and their expressions. Like Daniel Day-Lewis or Kate
Yeah.
Blanchett or whatever.
Yeah.
So just totally different things. And I think most people still aren't totally there to assume that Kate Blanchett or Daniel Day-Lewis have anything to actually worry about. Like they're still doing something
Yeah.
exceptionally.
Well, they're so
human.
famous.
But there's something exceptionally human about their abilities,
right.
like that they do something with their expressions that makes you feel things. To go back to your point about feeling something, but I also think there's a difference between a film and a TV show. That like I think what got me to do something once to me is different than what got me to keep watching something. And to me, that's almost a better description of what I really think is happening on TikTok. Outside of AI, I'm just saying in terms of user behaviors, that I think the thing that made these little videos on TikTok and in their predecessors, sort of YouTube videos, is that they were not necessarily high production value. There was a rawness to these experiences. There's a different marketplace of user behavior and consumption. I mean, you talk a lot about streamers, on the side of like, you've been sort of really spending time in that space of like YouTube streamers or Twitch streamers. That's a very different user experience that's connecting with a very different experience of quality and value and why I can't take my eyes off it. And whether it's the train wreck qualities of, true crime programming and the rubbernecking effect that kind of content has, or just something that you connect with in a different way. And again, that's starting to extract a direct relationship from production value of like how it was physically made. So it's interesting that rawness has over time even become an interesting attribute of all the changing media platforms. And I do think that's not necessarily a slider on an AI tool of like make it more raw, make it more real.
Right
like
now, it's not.
Currently, yeah, I know. So I don't know how you train it on rawness, and that'll be very interesting. I'm sure there's some Manus agent thinking about that as we speak. But like,
well, I guess my question is does rawness matter more than cleanliness?
I think at a consumer level.
At a consumer level, it might.
Yeah.
And so, which calls into question where do these clean models stand?
I think the clean models are trying to connect with a Hollywood that values that stuff because it affects their business, and I think that's probably a smart thing to focus on. But to your point,
is there a market? Is the clean model market only Hollywood and maybe the Hollywood adjacents, but not like the big kahuna opportunity of consumer mass adoption of AI and AI creation and all of that?
Which is its own question mark, because now we're watching all that rawness turn into a bunch of fake avatars on TikTok.
Yeah, right.
So look, it's really confusing stuff, but it's fun trying to figure it out with you. And I think we're going to find out later this year. It's probably going to be most companies' bottom line.
Yeah.
Of like whether or not this stuff works. Although I don't know, some of these big companies, every now and then I'm just like, oh, they're just on a different planet. Like I think I read somewhere that what Zuckerberg, which from what I can tell is a very wealthy person with a very successful company, I think they've had the privilege perhaps to spend $110 billion on all their VR, AR kind of metaverse experiments which is great to see people putting that type of energy behind experimentation.
Right.
But I think they've definitely not made $1 billion back, which even that would be some type of return. I think they're making maybe tens of millions back.
Well, that's how tech works, right? Like,
but that's how tech works.
Yeah, I mean, tech is investing forward, right? And to be fair, like, he still is the dominant player in VR, right? Despite Vision Pro and everybody else.
Totally.
Oculus,
I just mean
so maybe
I think
the Oculus bet pays off, I guess is the point I'm making.
I guess what I mean is we're watching, sadly, some VFX companies go out of business right now. There's some companies whose bottom lines did ultimately matter.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that they inevitably are in a universe where that middle line of like a negative business is inside of a gigantic profit line, which is the real money that they make. And that's an intense competition to be in. So I actually applaud Moon Valley and those guys for jumping into what is like a pretty massive space race of people throwing money at this, of what they think is a great opportunity of being the one ring to rule them all.
I mean, there's no precedent for it, right? I think it's not like Google came along after Yahoo and all of them and said, hey, we're the most ethical one. That's not what happened. They came along and they said, hey, we're better. We have a better algo.
Right.
We have a cleaner interface. I can't think of, or maybe I'm missing it.
I mean, I guess Whole Foods. I don't know if they win, but Whole Foods came in as a supermarket to say we want to be better than
that's fair.
A&P.
And then they got acquired by Amazon. Don't forget the irony.
The rule of thumb.
Well, cool, man. I think this is a great topic. We'll have to revisit it.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll see where we're at probably a month from now. at the way
we'll
this
see
goes.
by tomorrow. Let's check in on this topic tomorrow. Everything will have changed.
Yeah, we'll see.